This week on the Communicators, a look at the federal government's attempt to raise funds through the sale of analog television signals. Our guest is analyst Paul Glenchur.
And Paul Glenchur serves as a telecommunications analyst for the Stanford Group Company here in Washington, D.C. Welcome, sir.
Pleasure to be here.
Just so we set it up, a quick description of the Stanford Group Company, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. We provide insights and analysis on what's going on here in Washington from the regulatory, political, legislative perspective for institutional investors. And we cover a wide variety of areas, not just the telecom and the media space, but we look at healthcare, financial services, international trade, cover the Fed, politics in general, quite a few areas, aerospace, defense, utilities, and such. So it's an interesting area. I've been at it for about 9 years now, and so far it's been a pretty interesting thing to be doing.
Well, as far as interesting things are going, as we sit here today, there's currently an auction going on at the FCC. What should folks know about this auction, and what is being auctioned off?
Well, it's terrific spectrum. Now, there have been several auctions at the FCC. This is the best spectrum they've auctioned. At 700 megahertz, it has propagation characteristics that penetrate walls. And I've walked into an elevator, it closes, your cell phone goes dead. You lose your signal. That's not likely to happen with this spectrum. It's the broadcast TV spectrum that is being made available because of the digital TV transition. So broadcasters are moving elsewhere, and they're going to auction this off to commercial wireless providers.
And if I'm correct, when you say spectrum, does that mean the old UHF channels that some people might be familiar with?
That's right. I mean, we're talking about channels 52 on up, 52, 62. The digital TV spectrum is moving further down, and now these UHF channels open up, and they'll be made available at the auction.
And so the FCC is currently doing this. What's the end goal of auctioning off the spectrum?
Well, I think that there's several goals, and that actually raises some of the issues in this auction. They're trying to, of course, raise money for the U.S. Treasury, for the taxpayers, by selling it. They could raise 10, 12, some estimates have gone as high as $15 billion. We'll see if that happens. But mostly it's to get great spectrum in the hands of innovators and businesses that could, and carriers who can turn this into new services or even better wireless services for consumers.
The spectrum, as it's being described, it's called blocks.
That's right.
Why is that?
Well, because certain blocks, swaths, chunks, whatever you want to say, of spectrum are made available for particular licenses. And then, of course, geographically, the country is broken up so that certain licenses will be for smaller parts of the country, smaller segments of the country. Other licenses, well, one license in particular is being made available to a winner for the entire country. So there's varying sizes in terms of the size of the blocks and, of course, the size of the geographic territory covered.
And it's their purposes. I guess they're labeled A through E.
That's right.
And I guess when it comes to A, one is for 176 economic area license, B is a cellular market area license, C is the regional economic area grouping license, D is the nationwide license, and E is the economic area licenses. Do they all have the same kind of purposes, all these blocks?
Well, they have different purposes. I mean, the FCC, if you look at basically A, B, and E, those are the ones broken into smaller geographic territories. So, you know, the E block is broken into 176 parts of the country. And you have the B block that is 734. And that allows, whether it's a small carrier or a small wireless provider or even a larger wireless provider, to focus surgically on markets that make strategic sense for them to pursue. But then you have the C and D blocks, and that's where a lot of the discussion about this auction has taken place. The C block is two, basically 11 megahertz chunks that together comprise 22 megahertz that if you buy all 8 of the regional licenses made available here, you would cover the entire country. And that block not only could be deployed for commercial services, but it also has some conditions on it that have not been put on prior auctions, which is the winner, the licensee, is going to have to make this available as an open platform spectrum. In other words, you could bring any phone, as long as it's compatible with the transmission technology of that spectrum, you could bring any device to that spectrum and use it. It's open device. There are mandates regarding applications and content, that third-party applications are made available and not foreclosed by the licensee. So it's an open platform block. The D block it has a mixed mission. It is a commercial service block. You buy it, go make money on it. But it is right now part of a public-private partnership with public safety officials, where you would, as a licensee, would have to build on a nationwide basis a public safety interoperable broadband network nationwide that would cover not just the spectrum you win, but 10 megahertz of adjacent spectrum that is owned by public safety. And this is all in response to the need to have better communications after some of the disasters like Katrina, where first responders, fire, police, have problems communicating with each other in emergencies. So this is designed to help fix that.
We'll cover the last two specifically in a bit, but can we go back to the overall auction? What was the grand total as far as a figure of what the government was looking for to make off of this?
Well, I think it's been scored for about $10 billion. Some estimates have run as high as $15 billion in terms of what they could bring in. We'll see how it goes. I mean, part of the problem is it's not just let's get the most money we can for the spectrum. There are some who would say we should do that given deficits and such, but there are multiple purposes here. There's the public safety purpose. To pursue that means the commercial provider is going to have to make some compromises, so it may not be worth quite as much money on a pure commercial basis. The C block has open access conditions. The winner of that may decide that those regulatory conditions have a cost, which would reduce the value of the spectrum. So if you add it all up, maybe they get to 10 billion, 12 billion. We'll see how it goes. And economically, if conditions are such that people feel they have to be a little more cautious, that could affect the bidding for the spectrum too.
There have been a couple of rounds as we sit here for this spectrum. Many more rounds to go, but the current figure as far as what's been bidded so far sits at about $2.8 billion. Does that figure cause any concerns for all involved looking at trying to reach that ultimate goal?
Well, it's early yet. This auction could go on for a month, maybe longer than a month. And I think it's too early to predict exactly how much money this auction is going to raise. The biggest concern is probably whether they can raise the minimum reserve, which is $1.3 billion, the minimum essential bid for that D block, the public safety block. You know, if there's no bid that materializes at the reserve price, then we could fall a little short, but it's still early.
Is it like poker where everybody's holding their cards and seeing who's bidding what?
Well, it is, and particularly because it's an anonymous auction. Everyone participating in it has been admonished by the FCC not to talk about it, not to reveal what you're bidding for, what your upfront payment was, what your bid strategy is going to be. So, yeah, everyone's holding their cards close to the vest, and they're required as a regulatory matter to do so.
And so $2.8 billion, how many rounds will go on before people, you know, it gets to the point where saying, you know, this is the figure we're going to get, we're not going any further than this? And who makes that call?
Well, I think it's when there are no more bids and for any of the licenses. I think it's just multiple rounds. It'll go on and on. It's hard to predict where that ends, but the FCC has said when we're not getting any more bids, we're done. And the reason, even though it looks like maybe bidding in some blocks has expired, you keep it going until it's completely expired for all blocks is because there's a strategy involved. And they want to make sure that we've completed the entire process so that if you start stopping things and awarding things or breaking it up, it could affect someone's bid strategy for that one remaining license. So that's why they just say, look, we'll keep it going till basically the bids have stopped coming in.
Was it wise to do this now, considering the economic situation the whole country is in?
Well, the wisdom may be questionable to some degree. But by statute, the FCC has to conduct this auction and start it no later than the 28th of the month, so they started the 24th. They have to deposit the proceeds in the Treasury by the end of June. So the FCC really didn't have any choice here. And even the chairman, Kevin Martin, has said maybe financially, economically, this isn't the best time to conduct the auction, but his hands are tied. And so he's having to proceed with the auction under these circumstances.
One more question about process. If a bidder puts a figure in and they win, are they required then to stick with that bid, or could they change their mind?
Oh, no. I think you stick with it. There's forfeiture penalties. There's ways to enforce all of that. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is just because someone looks like they've won a bid, the FCC does not award when the bidding's over. They don't just say, "Oh, you've won, you're getting the license." They actually conduct a thorough review of everything in the application, everything regarding that particular winning bidder, and 10 days after they will announce who won, just to make sure that everyone has played according to the rules. And then when the down payments, 20% of the winning bid, become due, that's when certain rules and regarding how participants can communicate with each other come off, and we're basically done.
Participants, as they are, there's quite a list. Out of that list, who are the real people to watch, especially when you talked about those C and D blocks? I know that USA Today had a listing of folks who were involved in very common names as far as the telecommunications world is concerned. AT&T, there's Verizon, Google, EchoStar, Cablevision, Leap Metro PCS, Qualcomm, and then there's an individual investor, Paul Allen, involved
That's right,
too.
Vulcan.
Out of that list, I guess, are those the folks to watch, or who else would you keep an eye on?
Oh, I think those are definitely the players to watch. I mean, Chevron is in this auction.
The oil company?
Yes, the oil company.
What's their interest?
Well, it could be that just for internal communications, that it would be useful to have the spectrum. Some people have speculated perhaps they want to diversify, beyond their energy business. They could build something, lease it out. I mean, Southern Companies has a company called Southern Link, which provides consumer wireless services. But it's probably difficult to really speculate intelligently about what they want to do. But some people were surprised to see Chevron jump into this auction. But yeah, I think those are the main players in this auction, and those are the ones to watch.
For those interested in that open access platform, the Block C, if, say, a firm like AT&T or Verizon gets a hold of it, is it reasonable to think that they're going to start new services that would compete already with the services they already offer as wireless companies, or would they hold on to it, or what would they do with it?
AT&T and Verizon?
Right.
I think that the feeling is spectrum, particularly spectrum of this quality, is a terrific asset to own and control. And they will have the capacity for their growing wireless business. I mean, the future growth is tied so much to the expansion of wireless. There will be services, there will be products, content, all sorts of things, mobile video, and who knows what else, that will be coming. And having this kind of spectrum will ensure that they have the capability to roll out these new services as they are available, or to just beef up the quality of the service they offer today or in the near future. So I think it's just going to be there to be available for them to make sure that the wireless part of their business continues to expand and grow as it always has.
And so as far as that list, the ones we mentioned, those are the ones to watch out for especially?
I think so. I mean, the concern is that this was a big opportunity to try to create a brand new player. I mean, your main wireless players out there today, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, Alltel. You have Metro PCS and Leap, some smaller, some regional players, but was there a way to get a big player, national player, to jump into this and really shake up the market? There were those in the process where the FCC was making the rules for this to say, why don't we take these bans and say you cannot bid if you're a large incumbent, for example. The FCC didn't want to go that route. You take them out, you lower the auction returns. But it may be in the end that on the C block, a Verizon perhaps wins that, or an AT&T, we'll see. And on the D block, it could be that no bid materializes, or if one does, it's, again, an AT&T or a Verizon. So we may not get to that point of having a big national dynamic player come into the market and shake up the playing field.
When the rules were being crafted and in the spirit of trying to find someone to offer that shake-up, one of the names that came back time and time again in this process was Google.
That's right.
What was their role?
Well, Google has come into this auction. They're a participant in the auction. They lobbied hard for the open access conditions. They wanted the open platform conditions. And the sense is strategically, that makes sense, because as search and other applications go mobile and wireless, they have the ability to reach their consumer, that the carriers who control the networks can't stand between them and their customer. So by having open access, if they don't outright buy this spectrum, by having an open access condition, the idea is their customers, regardless of who their service provider is, will be able to reach them. So they pushed hard for open access, and they made commitments about bidding in this auction if the FCC agreed to impose these conditions. Now, the FCC did not impose all the conditions that Google requested, but I think given the spirit of what the FCC has done thus far, Google does feel obligated to bid perhaps up to the minimum amount for that C block, the open access block, which is $4.6 billion for the reserve price, to make sure that those open access conditions are locked in. Because the FCC has said if they don't get the minimum amount and they re-auction that spectrum, those conditions are going to come off. So Google has an incentive to make sure at least that the conditions are triggered.
So if they are bidding and if they win, do you think they want it for their purposes, or would they do something else with it? I know that speculation is, at least in the trades, that their purpose is not necessarily owning it per se.
Well, that's right. I think the feeling is it's a big undertaking to become a wireless service provider, and that's not their core competency. So we don't really know that they would want to pursue that if they want it. And again, a lot of speculation is they just want to trigger the open access conditions, and they'd be happy if someone else won it with those conditions. But let's say they did win it. Well, they could partner with someone on building it out.
Sprint has been mentioned as far as some of the trades, as far as maybe partnering with Sprint and other companies and trade for maybe wireless services like WiMAX or Wi-Fi or something along that way.
Yeah, there could be various deals that could be built around having won this spectrum. But it's a big undertaking to just go out and build a network from scratch. If you want to start and try to cover the whole country without any network facilities already in place, estimates run anywhere from $7 to $10 billion to do that. Whereas if you're an existing player, you can begin to leverage off your existing infrastructure to keep some of the capital costs down. The beauty of this spectrum, of course, is because it has such superior propagation characteristics that one cell site would be as good as 4 cell sites with the current architecture that we use at the current spectrum. So you have really capital efficient build out. So there is some benefit as far as that goes if someone wanted to launch into this space.
As far as the open access, would that mean that that I could buy a handset off the market, not tie it to a service, one service per se, but maybe go to another person and get service for it? Is that what it would mean?
That's right. There's a couple, open platform involves a couple of things here. Right now, most of the time, people go to a carrier, they get their phone from the carrier, and then they lock into a 2-year contract, service contract. The idea here is that you wouldn't have to take a phone from the carrier. You would just bring your own phone. If you're a Sprint user and you go to Verizon, or a Verizon user and you go to Sprint, depending on the open access feature a lot of people like to see is you could bring that, whatever phone you had, you don't have to buy a new phone. Here, now Sprint's not in this auction, T-Mobile's not in this auction, but let's say someone like a Verizon won the spectrum. It's the idea someone could go onto that network with their pre-existing device and have the Verizon turn it on and make it compatible with their network. Now, Verizon has said that they're going to have these sort of open access conditions, open device conditions across their entire network, and they're going to begin to certify devices for that beginning in the spring. So we'll see how that plays out. The interesting thing here is that the C block, by being a regulatory set of conditions, becomes a vehicle for the FCC to monitor and enforce all of this, as opposed to a purely voluntary situation where the carrier agrees to do that. So I think that's how that works. That's the open device idea. The open access conditions make it so that if there's some application or some content or some video or something that a customer wants to get to, there'd be no blockage of that. There'd be no limits where the carrier can create a walled garden, for example, where you're only limited to whatever applications they allow you to reach on that phone. So that's what Google really fought for here, and that's what they got.
And so if you had said that for some reason the figure that the FCC wanted for this particular block, the C block, it's not raised, they could re-auction it, take out those open access rules. Would that mean that the whole spirit of the idea of trying to find this third competitor to major telecommunications companies in the wireless business is done because the rarity of this spectrum? Was this the best last chance for that?
A lot of people say it was, that this is the last chance to really do that. And there are a number of players people thought could make sense. You know, would cable come in and do something? Could one of the direct broadcast satellite or both the direct broadcast satellite players come in? They have a national video audience. This would allow them to have a wireless broadband type of presence in the market, and they could bundle that in to compete better against the cable industry or the telephone industry. And then you have Google, and you know, the thinking is, and then of course on the DBlock, the public safety block, that's a nationwide block of spectrum too, that these were the great opportunities to bring in a big, deep pocket national player. So it may not come to pass that happens here. So will we have it? I think the bet right now is that's just not real likely.
And I guess as far as fostering innovative concepts in the wireless world or bringing these new products to service, who's going to take up that slack if this avenue is cut off? Is it just going to be the individual companies themselves with the existing spectrum they can work in?
Well, in terms of the kinds of innovations that are available, I think we'll see those. I think we'll see, for example, Google has an alliance with a couple of carriers are in it, software providers, equipment providers, where they're going to try to innovate and push for an open sort of set of standards. And again, you have carriers like Verizon have said, we're going to open it up. So the innovation should still happen. It should still come. The FCC will continue to monitor this. The FCC could become more aggressive over time about how these networks are operated. So I think that if we really see a situation where, because we may, for the most part, keep the same suspects in terms of operating these networks, we may still see the regulators incrementally beginning to push things, pressuring them. Even Capitol Hill could begin to put pressure on these guys to open things up more and more so that the innovation creeps in and it's not totally contingent on what the carriers agree to do. And again, you see the voluntary openness being promoted by Verizon Wireless, for example, to indicate that they see it coming and they're responding to it. So I think the dynamic is still there. It's easier, I think, if you just have a whole new player come in, national player, just to roll all this out. But I think it still comes, even if it comes a little bit more slowly.
Let's switch over to the DBlock, as it's called. You had mentioned at the beginning that one of the prospects for this block was for in the world of emergency communications, fire, rescue, police. When this DBlock came up for auction, one of the names at the very front in the news and otherwise was a company called Frontline. Reed Hunt headed that group and that effort, was a guest on our program, and he talked a little bit of what he wanted to do. I wanted you to take a listen of what he wanted.
Look, here's what we will do with this spectrum, with these airwaves, with a couple of these today UHF channels, if you give us a chance to buy them in the auction. We will build a national network. It'll do two things at the same time. It'll face to one side and sell a wireless broadband service to any retailer in the country, any startup company, to Steve Jobs with the iPhone, or to the Palm people, or to Google if they decide to invent a Google phone. We'll build the national network and we'll sell it to anyone that wants to invent a new device or invent a new company. At the same time, we will build for free for all of public safety, all the policemen, all the fire departments in the United States, a national network that they can use. Thousands of public safety entities, policemen, fire departments, all across the country. For 13 years, they've been waiting for somebody to build them a national network in this spectrum. No one has done it. Congress hasn't appropriated the money, and we said we will build that network for free. Now, the FCC is going to have to help us by writing rules that say, you know, you get the bidding credit and you get a chance to do it, but it's a very, very laudable public policy purpose, and we want to have a shot at accomplishing it.
Paul Glenchur, that was in May of last year. Is Frontline still in the game?
Well, they dropped out. It came time to put the upfront payment in of $128 million, and knowing that there was a $1.3 billion reserve, and at the end of the day, they didn't do it. So they were the obvious candidate to go after this spectrum. They were created to go after this spectrum. So who's going to do it? The obvious candidates are still AT&T and Verizon. Now, the interesting thing here, perhaps they don't get the $1.3 billion they need at the FCC, but a couple of years ago, Verizon was talking to the FCC about building a public safety network. Now, it wasn't this idea about buying 10 megahertz of spectrum, entering in all these elaborate regulatory obligations to do it. It was more, there's spectrum that the public safety community is getting because of the digital TV transition. There's 24 megahertz that's been assigned to them, but they need resources to build it out. We'll do it. We'll do it on the public safety spectrum, and you'd have public safety anchor tenants, in a sense. On that spectrum, they'd get fees for the use of the network. So there was talk about that. So the thinking is, well, just maybe there is some interest here, that at $1.3 billion, it may make sense to buy the spectrum and leverage off existing infrastructure to go ahead and put some sort of a public safety network in place. But I think most folks, I think, are skeptical that anyone's going to actually step up and buy it here. It may happen, but it's obviously a much more difficult call with Frontline out of the running.
Is it problematic to have a commercial venture and a public safety venture operate at the same time? Because if I understand it, they would pretty much operate in tandem until the public safety needs kick in, and then they kind of override one or the other.
That's right.
If I'm explaining it.
No, that's right. But the theory is that public safety wouldn't have to preempt the commercial block. I mean, under the rules, the public safety entities have the right to preempt the commercial users on that D block, the 10 megahertz D block, in a time of crisis. But absent a Katrina type of situation or an attack of some sort or something where you absolutely have to preempt, most of the time that's just not going to happen. So the public users would stay working in the public safety band on this broadband network nationwide, and the 10 megahertz D block would just go its commercial merry way, and there wouldn't be any need to trigger the preemption rights. But still, there's a network sharing agreement. There's specifications that public safety makes regarding how the network's going to be built. There's some issues about good faith negotiations, whether the commercial providers is truly working with public safety to put this network sharing agreement together. The FCC could step in to arbitrate any disagreements. All this was supposed to happen in the 6-month period following winning the bid, winning the spectrum. But in this environment, there may just be a lot of questions about how would that really play out. If you're a private investor putting, not just the money into the spectrum, but spending the money to build it, are you going to get a good return on that investment given all of these conditions as well as the current economic environment? And it just may be too many questions at this point to be willing to take that bet at this time. In another context, perhaps, but maybe right now it doesn't quite happen as some would expect it to.
But if this goes by the wayside, then what do you think the FCC and Congress is going to go do looking at it, especially for a need like this?
Well, I think you'll have some in Congress who say, look, you tried the experiment. It failed. Let's forget about it. Let's just auction it free and clear to whoever wants it. It would raise $1.8, maybe $2 billion if it were free and clear of the public safety obligations, and just put the money in the U.S. Treasury. Let the commercial provider do what they want with it. But I don't think it is likely to go that way. I think there is a genuine need, as perceived by Congress and the regulators, to create a public safety network and fix the communications problems in public safety. So I think they'll stick with that.
Politics will then pretty much get involved in this.
I think that's right, and it's politics, but it's policy too. I mean, it's good policy. I think everyone agrees. Until you get hit with another crisis need for that spectrum, do you really appreciate how much you have to have it? And I think without the resources to build it, it remains a priority to try to make this public-private partnership work. I mean, if Congress isn't going to go out and just say, okay, here's $10 billion, we can just build it, then the public-private partnership, I think, is still perceived here in town as the way to do that. And I think you'll see continued pressure from the Hill, not everyone, but key members in Congress, and the FCC to go ahead and try to work this out to make the public-private partnership work. Now, that could be complicated. It may not be as simple as just dropping the reserve price. It may be that they have to look at how the build-out mandates, how fast, how rapidly you have to build the spectrum out across the country. It may be other conditions have to be looked at. And the risk, of course, is that if the regulators have to shift more of the control in that partnership to the private part, what does public safety have to say about that? So you could get into a situation where striking that balance becomes politically difficult. And that could cause us to drag out perhaps a little bit longer than what the regulators would like to have happen. But I would guess that that is the next step if the DBlock doesn't get a reserve bid in this auction.
We got about 30 seconds. When will the winners be unveiled?
Our guess is probably month and a half. It could be March when we hear. Again, the down payments are going to be due about 20 days after. They will announce the winners, and if there's an auction that has to be an additional auction, a re-auction, well then this could extend by several more weeks or perhaps another month or so. We'll see, but it's interesting, and the FCC has a big challenge here to get a lot of things accomplished in this auction, and I think they're doing the best they can under some very tough circumstances.
Paul Glenchur is the telecommunication analyst for the Stanford Group Company. Thanks for joining us on the Communicators.
Nice to be here.